You're breathtaking.
Husbands and wives that got divorced after 20 years of marriage. What made you decide to change your mind after all that time? He tried to kill me, which I feel is impolite. My parents split up after nearly 30 years. My dad was an asshole my entire life, so when they finally divorced when I was 18, there was no surprise. He'd been cheating for years and I think he was the one who finally asked for it. I think my mom stayed because she couldn't afford to start over. She spent her life putting my dad through school and wasn't educated herself. She had no family or anyone who could help her either. There was definitely some confidence issues on her part too. Therapy changed my mind. After more than a decade of being miserable, I finally got help. When I was able to really talk about my marriage was when I realized that I needed to get the frick out. At the end of the day, I stayed in a shitty marriage because the thought of being alone scared me. Through therapy, I was clued into how many wonderfully supportive friends and family members I had if I just reached out to them. I wasn't going to be in a relationship anymore, but I wasn't alone either. My husband began surreptitiously going to strip clubs. He stole about $200 a week from various accounts and a business I owned to fund these activities. He lost his job because he went there so often at lunch and would just stay. We had young kids and so I stayed after he got some therapy. He was never honest with the therapist. About a year ago I learned he was doing it again, plus texting strippers. My youngest kid graduates high school this year. I've done what's best for everyone else for 20 years now. This September was 21 years. I don't anticipate having a 22nd anniversary. It's really scary to think of being alone. I don't hate him, I feel sorry for him. I know he will feel very sad and lonely when I'm gone, but being near him feels like having my soul ripped from my body every day. My husband's parents did this. He said he knew his parents weren't happy for a long time. Said they went to family therapy together, but ultimately once my husband went to the army, he was the younger of two. They divorced and both later married other people. These two could not get along for anything. They hated each other. At our wedding, we had to take separate family pictures with the dad and new wife and then with the mom and my sister-in-law. It was insane. Cut to about 2 years after our wedding and I get a phone call from father-in-law's wife of 10 years. She is in hysterics. She had caught him in bed with my mother-in-law. My husband would not believe it until he talked to his father. That was over 10 years ago. My in-laws both divorced their partners and have been together ever since. My mother-in-law has all their old family pictures on display everywhere and acts like they never divorced and have been together for over 4 decades. Ha 23 years. I had lied to her several times over the years, and she always forgave me. The last time I lied to her about accruing a severe amount of debt due to a gambling addiction. I think she might have forgiven the lie, but she couldn't forgive the addiction and the chance I'd start gambling again. I started attending Gamblers Anonymous after I told her, but it was too little too late for her. On the plus side, I haven't gambled in almost 3 years. There's a guy in my town that everyone knows about because he owns this huge-ass mansion in a middle-class neighborhood. Apparently he was married to a woman for a long time, but she left him, calling him a loser because his business hadn't taken off yet. After she left him, his business finally took off. He sells medical equipment to hospitals, and he became freaky levels of rich in a few years. The reason he built the mansion in that neighborhood was because that is where she lives, so she has to drive by the mansion on her way to work every day. My parents got divorced after 22 years of marriage. They were never in love and didn't even like each other. They had me and then my sister a few years later and wanted to stay together for the kids. 12 years after I was born, they had my brother, and that kept the cycle going. I wish I could say they are happy now, but they still like to cause trouble for each other. We're due with our first child soon and they're gonna have to figure out how to be grandparents together. Thankfully, I'm 1,500 miles from them, so it won't be a headache often. I worked at a law firm that only practiced family law, divorces, child custody, wills and estates, etc. At one time we had like 8 clients getting divorced after 20+ years of marriage, and they were all high-ranking military men whose wives came out of the closet after all their kids had grown up and moved out of the house, and the guys were getting ready to retire. I thought it was so weird, but I guess for whatever reason the women thought that their duties to their husbands and families were coming to an end and they wanted to live for themselves. I guess I know why they couldn't come out 30 years ago. It was a different time, but I was curious why they were all attracted to military guys. I assume maybe cause it meant their husbands would be away for years at a time during their service. Parents divorced after 25 years when my mom had what we thought at the time was a midlife crisis. She told my dad by draining $3K from the joint checking account to fund her divorce lawyer. 6 years later they were officially divorced since she blew through that money on different lawyers that kept firing her as a client. We later ruled out midlife crisis when her behavior started to become more odd, erratic, and paranoid. She was in her early 50s when this behavior started. Now myself and my sister-in-law with psychology experience think she has late onset bipolar, and I say think since we can't get her officially diagnosed since she believes nothing is wrong with her. She lives in NY and it is super hard to commit someone there unless they are a danger to themselves or other people. She's not dangerous, just can't hold down a job and lives in her car due to her own insubordinate sporadic paranoid behavior but blames everyone else. No, she's not a narcissist, just mentally ill since she was never like this when we were growing up. She was very selfless and caring when she was younger. Well, funny story. My parents were high school sweethearts and married for 22 years. Then they got divorced when I was 6. My dad remarried and had another kid and got divorced again. My mom never did. Fast forward about 30 years. I got married. My parents were in the same room for the first time in 30 years and were flirting like teenagers. I have video of it. It really is pretty amusing to watch. Until I remember it's my parents. They have been dating since I got married. That was more than 5 years ago. They are virtually living together, and both of them think it's funny to allude to their sex life around me so that I'll be embarrassed, which still works, despite my age. As to your question, my mom says that my dad has mellowed and turned into not a bad guy. My dad says my mom is exactly the same, except her waist. I think they both never found anyone they liked as much as each other, or hated as much as each other. And if that isn't marriage, I don't know what the hell is. We were together for 20 years, married for 15. We started as high school sweethearts, but we eventually realized that we weren't the same people we were when we fell in love. We also realized that that wasn't going to change. We decided that the best way for everyone to be happy for the rest of our lives was to end it on peaceful terms before we were both 70 and resentful of each other for trapping each other in an unhappy marriage for 40+ years. Obligatory, not me. My parents. My dad filed for divorce after 25 years of marriage. My mom was shell-shocked. My dad was absolutely miserable, but the signs of a failed marriage were always present. My dad is very emotional and is quick to anger. He never really handled failure very effectively and would be mad instead of constructive. My mom very family-oriented and was adamant that we never move farther than 40 miles from Chicago. Hell, when I was going away to college, she bawled to my dad to force me to go to a school closer to home. In a way, I think my dad resented my mom for never letting him travel or get away from Chicago. It also doesn't help that I'm fairly certain my mom became undiagnosed depressed once her mom died. All she would do was do her bare minimum at her job, a school bus driver, come home and sleep, finish a route for the day, cook a hamburger, help her meal for the family, and then play Angry Birds on her iPad. It's really weird seeing your parents divorce in your 20s. You're adult enough to speak candidly and neither of them likes what you have to say about them during or after the fact. The silver lining out of it is my sisters and I know how not to behave in a relationship. I will be one of the few that speaks from experience. I have been married 20 years, and we are on the edge. The answer is that life changes you. When you start out, the relationship is its own thing. It is cultivated and grows. Then over the years add some children and full-time jobs, and there is less time to cultivate, or none. You end up becoming life partners to run the household, and wonder why you are even together. Since there are no good times, all that is left are arguments and bad times. This is all normal, and on top of that you are both going through the personal struggles of living. To be honest, staying married is tougher than most people think in an age without divorce social stigma. The kids do keep you together, hoping somehow you can rekindle something that once existed. And this is in a situation with two good people trying to do the right thing, and not a toxic situation with abuse. Not me, but my grandmother once told me that she was considering divorcing her husband of over 50 years. The reason she gave me was, we stayed together for the kids. Now the kids are all grown up and have lives of their own. And now I can't ignore the small things about him. My grandpa, that annoy me. She didn't go through with it, but she seemed sincere when she said it. It broke my heart, especially since I only ever saw the best side of him. Didn't get divorced but started the process after about 25 years. Stuck it out for a few more years for the kids and ended up falling in love with her after the kids moved out. Relationships follow cycles. So glad I stuck it out. A friend of mine was married for nearly 30 years, 2 kids. As she put it, they'd been playing divorce chicken for a decade. There weren't any concrete reasons to get divorced. They didn't fight. They actually got along very well. They just weren't in love anymore. There was always a good pragmatic reason for them to stick together. They co-parented effectively. They actually liked each other. They kept saying their marriage was probably better than a lot of people's. A few years ago they just decided it was time. They went out for drinks and started hashing out how to divide their assets. They agreed on a 50-50 split. They got a lawyer to make everything legit and a few months later they got divorced. My friend's ex-husband rented a house a few blocks away so the kids could easily walk between mom's and dad's house. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, my friend's ex-husband set her up with a new boyfriend. They go on double dates. They go to parent-teacher conferences together. My dad had multiple affairs and my mom got tired of it. There was also alcoholism and both parents were workaholics. My dad remarried a lovely woman, and so did my mom. Oh, that may have been an issue too. Not me, but a lady I worked with. Her and her husband had been married for almost 30 years. They had 2 kids, both in their mid-late teens, and a full life together. She was the stay-at-home mom, he made the big bucks, etc. Anyways, once the kids both started to grow up and stopped wanting to go to the cottage, they realized that when left alone together they didn't have much in common. Then the kids started leaving for school, and I guess things got worse. I think everything would have been fine if not for the father's dad, the grandfather, getting sick. Turns out the old man had near $4 million to his name and was giving it all to the father. So, dad consults a lawyer who says that since it's an inheritance, if he's divorced before he gets it he can keep all of it, and as such, he divorces her within days. She stopped working for us shortly after, but I know it was pretty hard on her. She got her fair shake of the currently owned assets, but couldn't touch the $4 mill. About to start the process myself. 19 years married, together 21. Now that the kids are older, self-sufficient, 2 of the 3 are driving. Don't need their hands held for every little thing, it will be a lot easier on them. It's all I can do to get 5 minutes of her attention in a day. She has her head down in her Kick Chat app from the moment she gets up and back home and goes to bed. She's been meeting guys, just friends I swear, from Kick for lunch and getting a lot of massages with her therapist at weird hours of the evening. Of course she's cheating, although she swears she isn't. She turns her iPhone location services off most of the time she is out. 6 months ago she started getting her lashes done, brows, tans, goes to the gym, walks for exercise, massages 3-4 times a month. She gets pissed when I text her asking what she's doing or when she will be home or if she will be home for dinner. So, after all this time it's clear she doesn't want time or anything else from me. So might as well let her go do her thing. My grandparents initiated divorce proceedings a month after my dad, the youngest of his siblings, graduated college. They had stayed together to provide a stable home for their children, and once they'd all left the nest, my grandparents were ready to move on. My parents got divorced because of my dad. We grew up in a military family. Dad was always deployed. My mom is a walking medical disaster. No offense to her. Raw at 23, endometriosis at 24, got a hysterectomy and everything. They married early and had kids really early because of the endometriosis. My mom tried to cater to my dad, make sure he could still live his life in his 20s because they had kids earlier than expected. Well, being deployed all the time meant my dad could just frick around with ladies off in other places. My mom stayed home and took care of us. Dad gets a divorce when he gets back, gets remarried like 3 months later. That lasted like 2 years before she got her green card and ditched him. My mom still loves him despite him moving on to his 3rd marriage, having another kid, and never actually paying his portion of child support. So pretty much they got divorced so my dad could have a younger, more subservient wife. Please subscribe if you liked the video. It really helps the channel to grow. See you again.